The winding road that led to Blackwood Manor was less a path and more a suggestion, a faint scar through the dense, dripping old-growth forest of the Pacific Northwest. Rain had been a constant companion for the last 3 hours, a relentless drumbeat against the roof of my truck. But as I finally cleared the last curve, a sudden, almost theatrical silence fell. The downpour eased to a fine mist, hanging heavy and white in the air, obscuring the distant peaks and pressing in on the towering firs. Then I saw it. Blackwood Manor wasn't just a house, it was a hulking, Gothic silhouette against the bruised sky. A monument to a forgotten era. Turrets clawed at the clouds, gables jutted like broken teeth, and countless windows, dark and vacant, stared out from under heavy stone brows. It was larger than I'd imagined. Far grander and more formidable than the faded photographs my great-aunt Laura had occasionally sent. Decades of neglect had softened its sharp edges with moss and trailing vines, giving it an appearance of organic decay, as if the forest itself were slowly reclaiming its stolen ground. This was my inheritance, the legacy of a woman I barely knew, a reclusive botanist whose life had ended as mysteriously as he had lived it. A fresh start, I'd told myself, a place to bury the past, to outrun the echoes of that shattered life I'd left behind. The idea had been a quiet hum of hope, a desperate gamble. But standing here, in the damp quiet, a different kind of hum began, low and resonant, vibrating through the soles of my boots. It wasn't hope, it was something else entirely. I killed the engine, and the silence descended like a physical weight. The only sound was the drip of water from the ancient eaves, a rhythmic plink 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 that seemed to mark the passage of time in a place where time itself felt irrelevant. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth, decaying leaves, and something else, a faint cloying sweetness like overripe fruit or wilting blossoms. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. The grandeur was undeniable, but so was the unease, a cold tendril coiling in my gut. Pushing open the heavy oak front door was like cracking open a tomb. Dust motes danced in the sparse shafts of light that pierced the gloom from a distant window. My footsteps echoed unnervingly on the polished, scuffed flagstones of the ante-hall. A massive, cobweb-draped chandelier hung precariously from the vaulted ceiling, its crystal facets dulled by years of grime. I started my exploration slowly, methodically. This was my home now, or would be. Room after room revealed the same story, forgotten opulence, layers of dust, and the ghosts of lives lived in solitude. The library was a labyrinth of towering shelves overflowing with leather-bound volumes, their spines cracked, their pages brittle. The drawing room held shrouded furniture, draped like sleeping giants. Everywhere, the air felt thick, as if it held memories suspended, waiting for an unsuspecting ear. In what must have been Alara's study, I found the first real hints of her life. A heavy oak desk, scarred and ink-stained, stood beneath a tall window overlooking what I presumed were her famous gardens. On the desk, amidst stacks of dried, pressed leaves and a scattering of clay pots, lay a leather-bound journal. Its cover was embossed with a single, unfamiliar flower, its petals unfurling in an almost grotesque fashion. I picked it up, my fingers brushing against the cool, dry leather. The pages were filled with Alara's spidery handwriting, detailing botanical observations, sketches of plants I didn't recognize, and entries that grew increasingly erratic and fragmented as I flipped deeper. She wrote of symbiotic relationships, of the living architecture, and of the deep roots that bind. There were references to specific parts of the manor, not as rooms, but as chambers or nodes. A shiver traced its way down my spine. This wasn't just a botanist's journal, it felt like a madwoman's diary. I pushed the memory down, hard. It didn't belong here. Not now. I turned my attention back to the journal, but my focus was fractured. The sickly sweet smell seemed to intensify, clinging to my clothes, filling my lungs. I noticed now, too, a faint, almost imperceptible vibration underfoot, a low thrumming that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the house. It wasn't an earthquake, it was too steady, too rhythmic. It felt organic. My gaze drifted to the window overlooking the gardens again. Beyond the study, deeper into the manor's sprawling footprint, I could see a conservatory, its glass panels fogged and green with internal growth. Even from this distance, the shapes within looked less like conventional plants and more like some monstrous, verdant architecture pressing against the glass. Something was moving inside, a slow, deliberate undulation. Alara wasn't just tending a garden, he was tending something else. And Blackwood Manor, I suddenly realized, wasn't just a house. It was a vessel. The silence following the last scratching entry in Alara's journal settled over the grand hall like a shroud. It wasn't the comforting quiet of a sleeping house. It was the kind that pressed in, heavy and absolute, reminding me, jarringly, of another kind of silence, the suffocating hush in an intake-holding area during power outage, where the usual hum of machinery died, leaving only the strained breathing of a few people. I closed the journal, its aged leather cover cool beneath my fingers, and pushed away from the massive oak desk. A madwoman's diary, yes, but also a botanist's meticulous record, filled with details of peculiar hybrids and growth patterns that made my skin prickle. Despite the unease, I was still Blake, the man who'd come here for a new beginning, not to be spooked by an old woman's eccentricities. I needed to settle in, unpack the few boxes I'd brought, find a proper place for my own books, stake some claim in this cavernous dwelling. I chose a room on the second floor, overlooking the overgrown gardens, far from the grand hall and its unsettling desk. It was smaller, less ornate than some of the others, with a tall, arched window that let in the pale, filtered light of the Pacific Northwest afternoon. As I began to unpack a box of my old clothes, folding shirts into a dusty wardrobe whose hinges grown like distant sighs, I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible murmur. It was like the rustling of dry leaves, but with an underlying cadence, a rhythm that wasn't quite natural. I paused, a pair of worn jeans half folded in my hand, and listened. Not there, just the faint sigh of the wind outside, stirring the ancient branches of a colossal redwood. I shook my head, dismissing it as the house settling or the wind playing tricks. This place was old, after all, and I was on edge. I continued unpacking, trying to focus on the mundane task. But then, a floorboard creaked directly above me. Not the usual settling creak of an old house, but a distinct, heavy thump followed by a slow, dragging groan. My breath caught. I was on the top habitable floor. I waited, straining my ears until the only sound was the frantic beat of my own heart. It had to be the wind. I told myself, a gust strong enough to shift something in the attic, or a branch scraping the roof. I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to convince myself of logical explanations, but the undercurrent of unease persisted. Towards dusk, needing a distraction and a clear head, I decided to explore the gardens Alara had so obsessively cultivated. I followed a winding, stone path, choked with weeds and moss, that led deeper into the estate. The trees here grew thicker, their gnarled branches weaving a canopy that blocked out the fading light, plunging the path into a premature twilight. The air grew heavy, humid, even though the outside temperature was cool. Then I saw it, tucked away behind a dense thicket of rhododendrons, a massive glass structure, half swallowed by ivy and flowering vines. It was Alara's conservatory, a colossal, domed cage of iron and glass, some panes cracked, others completely shattered, allowing the wild growth within to spill outwards in a riot of unfamiliar foliage. The sight was breathtaking and terrifying. I pushed through a gap in the clinging vines, the air inside immediately warmer, thicker, saturated with the smell of damp earth and an overwhelming, cloying sweetness that made my head spin. It was a jungle, a vibrant, terrifying explosion of green. Plants I'd never seen before climbed the ironwork, their leaves the size of dinner plates, their flowers strangely ornate, some pulsating with a faint, internal luminescence. Fat, fleshy tendrils hung from the ceiling, dripping a clear, viscous sap onto the moss-covered flagstones below. The light filtered through the grimy glass and dense canopy cast the whole place in an eerie, emerald glow. As I stepped further in, the ground felt strangely soft, springy beneath my boots, like walking on a thick, linen carpet. The air hummed with a low, resonant vibration that I felt more in my bones than heard with my ears. It was a deep, rhythmic thrumming, like a vast, unseen heart beating just beneath the earth. My gaze swept across the bizarre flora, trying to identify anything familiar, anything that made sense. But it was all alien, a verdant nightmare. Then I heard it again, clearer this time, distinct from the buzzing of insects or the dripping of sap. It wasn't a human voice, not exactly, but a collection of soft, sibilant sounds like dry leaves rubbing together or scales rustling. It seemed to emanate from the largest, most central plant, a monstrous, vine-covered mound that dominated the center of the conservatory, its roots seemingly fused with the very foundation of the building. As I watched, mesmerized and horrified, a single, thick vine, draped over a broken pillar, slowly, deliberately, began to uncoil itself, its tip reaching, ever so slightly, towards me. My breath hitched, my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This wasn't the wind. This wasn't an old house settling. I felt a primal urge to scream, to run, but my feet were rooted to the spot, held captive by the unsettling beauty and the terrifying, undeniable presence of whatever lurked in the heart of Alara's impossible garden. The air then, thick with the smell of ozone and fear, had been a physical weight. My breath hitched, a phantom memory of panic tightening my chest. I pushed the thought away, hard. That was then. This was now. It spreads. It demands. What was she talking about? The house itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. A low thrum, almost imperceptible, vibrated through the floorboards beneath my boots. It wasn't the house settling. It felt more organic, like a pulse. I found myself drifting, not consciously choosing a direction, but drawn by an invisible current. My steps led me past the dusty parlor, through a dimly lit gallery of faded portraits, until I stood before a massive, ornate door at the far end of the west wing. The air here was different, thicker, humid, carrying a faint earthy aroma that was both sweet and cloying. It was the smell of rich soil and something else, something fermenting, something alive. This had to be it. The conservatory. The door was heavy, resisting my push at first, then giving way with a drawn-out groan that echoed through the quiet wing. A wave of hot, damp air washed over me, carrying the intense, verdant scent. It was like stepping into a different climate entirely, a tropical rainforest transplanted into the heart of the Pacific Northwest. My eyes struggled to adjust to the dim, green-tinged light. Glass panels, thick with grime and streaked with moisture, formed the ceiling, filtering the outside world into a murky, emerald glow. What I saw inside wasn't a curated garden. It was a sprawling, untamed jungle. Massive fronds, some wider than my outstretched arms, dripped condensation onto the flagstone path that snaked through the dense foliage. Vines, thick as my wrist, coiled around ancient stone pillars, their tendrils reaching for the unseen ceiling. The plants themselves were unlike anything I'd ever seen. Their leaves boasted unnatural hues, deep purples, iridescent blues, and sickly yellows that pulsed with faint veins. Some bore elaborate, fleshy blooms that looked less like flowers and more like gaping mouths, their petals unfurling in slow, silent movements. Others had thorns that looked like polished obsidian, or broad, flat pads that seemed to slowly undulate as if breathing. The air was thick with their combined exhalations, a heavy, humid breath that pressed in on me, making my own lungs feel sluggish. A soft, squelching sound accompanied my every step on the moss-covered flagstones. I moved deeper, my senses on high alert. The humidity made my shirt cling to my skin, and a thin sheen of sweat broke out on my forehead. After what felt like an hour, pushing aside thick, velvety leaves and ducking under drooping branches, I stumbled upon a small, circular clearing. In the center, almost swallowed by the encroaching greenery, stood a weather-beaten wooden table and a matching chair, both coated in a fine layer of green moss. On the table, nestled between a cluster of broad-leafed plants with an almost metallic sheen, sat a stack of leather-bound books. Elara's journals. My fingers trembled slightly as I picked up the topmost volume. The leather was damp, cool to the touch, and smelled faintly of loam and something metallic, like old blood. I opened it to a random page, the paper thick and yellowed. Elara's elegant script, so precise in the first journal, had grown erratic, almost desperate. The growth responds to heat now. It pulses. I felt it, a low thrumming against the glass. A paradox, truly. I flipped to another page. The tendrils are reaching, testing the boundaries. It learns. The root is deeper than I imagined. It feeds not on soil, not on water. It requires sustenance. And then, in a scrawled, almost illegible hand, I've given it everything. My time, my knowledge, myself. It is never enough. The hunger is endless, and it remembers. It remembers the ones who nurture it. The air grew heavier. The earthy scent more potent, almost intoxicating. Was it my imagination, or did the leaves around me subtly shift, angling towards me, as if sensing my presence, my fear? Ilara wasn't just a reclusive botanist, tending a peculiar garden. He was tending something else. Something vast, something hungry. This organic, silent hunger was far, far worse. That the house itself, I realized. The thought, unbidden, was a chill that snaked its way down my spine, colder than the damp air of the conservatory. I stood frozen, my breath catching in my throat, the earthy aroma of the strange, flowering thing suddenly cloying, suffocating. The prickling sensation intensified, crawling over my skin like 1,000 unseen insects. It wasn't a casual glance. It was a sustained, assessing gaze, heavy with an intelligence that felt ancient and predatory. I tried to shake it off, to dismiss it as exhaustion, a trick of the light, anything but the impossible. No, wait, I muttered, my voice thin and reedy in the vast space. You're losing it. I forced myself to move, to turn away from the dense, pulsating flora, my eyes scanning the shadowed corners of the room. Nothing, only the familiar, unsettling silhouettes of exotic leaves and tendrils. Back in the main hall, the silence was no longer peaceful. It was expectant. A heavy mahogany door, one I was certain I had latched securely, stood ajar, revealing a sliver of the gloomy library beyond. I remembered closing it. I distinctly remembered the click of the brass latch. My stomach clenched. I approached it slowly, pushing it open the rest of the way. The air inside was stagnant, tasting of old paper and dust. A single, leather-bound volume lay open on the floor, its spine cracked, pages fanned out as if dropped in haste. I hadn't touched it. As my fingers brushed the brittle cover, the ornate, gilded frame of a portrait hanging above the fireplace gave a sudden, jarring thunk. It shifted, tilting precariously, its painted eyes, Alara's eyes, now fixed on me at an unnatural angle. It wasn't a gradual slip. It was a sharp, deliberate movement, as if someone had nudged it from behind. I backed away, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This wasn't just old house creaks. This was active, deliberate. I retreated to the relative safety of the main staircase, my gaze sweeping the cavernous hall. I could feel the house watching me, absorbing my fear, perhaps even feeding on it. A sudden, desperate need to connect with the outside world seized me. I pulled out my phone. No signal, not even a single bar. I swore under my breath, trying again, walking toward the front door, then the back, then even pressing it against a window pane, hoping for some miraculous flicker of connection. A dead zone. I remembered the estate agent mentioning the isolation, but I'd always had some signal. I tried the landline next, a relic of a bygone era. Tucked away in a small study, I pressed it to my ear. Only a flat, unwavering hum. No dial tone. Completely dead. Panic began to prickle at the edges of my resolve. This wasn't just bad luck. It felt orchestrated. The house seemed to take a deeper breath around me. The air grew heavier, thicker, pressing in. The windows, once sources of light, now felt like blank, unseeing eyes, reflecting only my own increasingly frantic image. I caught my reflection in the polished surface of a grandfather clock's glass. I blinked, and it was gone, my familiar, tired face staring back. Determined, I decided to find the main electrical panel. If the phone lines were dead, maybe the power was faltering too, affecting the cell booster I assumed was somewhere on the property. I remembered seeing a utility access point in the basement during my initial tour, but I hadn't gone far. Now, it was my only hope. I navigated through cobweb-draped storage rooms, past forgotten crates and shrouded furniture, until I found a heavy, reinforced door at the very back. It wasn't on any floor plan I'd seen. It looked almost industrial, out of place in Blackwood Manor. The door was unlocked, surprisingly, and creaked open to reveal a narrow corridor lined with rough, unpainted concrete. Pipes, thick and corroded, snaked along the ceiling, dripping intermittently onto the floor. I pressed on, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, until I reached a larger, open area. This was it. Or, at least, I thought it was. The space was stark, utilitarian, unlike anything else in the house. A large, complex panel of antiquated switches and gauges covered one wall, all silent and still. The label, stenciled crudely on the wall above the cubicles, confirmed it. My mind reeled. It was the residue. It smelled faintly sweet, but also profoundly organic, like compost left too long or something once living now decaying. And then I saw them, etched into the concrete floor beneath each cubicle, faded but undeniable, shallow, circular depressions about the size of a human head, connected by thin, almost roux-like channels that snaked towards a central drain. My great aunt Alara, the reclusive botanist, the peculiar gardens, the Manavat breathed. This wasn't for plants. My mind screamed, trying to piece together the horror. This was for something else, something that required an intake, something that needed to be held. And the power outage, it wasn't just a failure. The house wasn't just watching. It was preparing. And I was trapped. The greenish-black film on the grates, that cloying, organic sweetness, clung to my mind long after I'd retreated from the lower depths. The scent, subtle at first, seemed to follow me, a phantom perfume that occasionally wafted through the manor's grand, dusty halls, making me question whether it was truly in the air or just etched into my memory. Sleep offered no escape. My nights became a succession of feverish, hallucinatory dreams. I'd find myself wandering the conservatory, but it was twisted, distorted. The familiar orchids would contort into grotesque, fleshy mouths, their petals unfurling like lips, revealing rows of tiny, needle-sharp stamens that vibrated with an unheard hum. I saw Laura, not as a woman, but as a silhouette, her form shifting, merging with the strangest plants, her skin becoming bark, her hair a tangle of creeping vines. He was always smiling, a slow, knowing bloom across her face, as if she were the ultimate gardener, tending to something ancient and hungry. The lines began to blur. During the day, the periphery of my vision would flicker. A shadow would elongate, reaching, only to snap back to its proper form when I focused. The antique wallpaper in the study, with its intricate floral patterns, would sometimes seem to breathe, the painted leaves subtly expanding and contracting as if drawing breath. I'd blink, rub my eyes, and the illusion would vanish, leaving me with a dull ache behind my temples and a prickle of unease crawling up my spine. Was I tired? Stress? Or was the house itself seeping into my mind, its peculiar essence infecting my senses? Yet, a new sensation began to take root, a peculiar, almost physical pull. It wasn't a voice, nor a vision, but a deep, resonant hum in my chest, drawing me deeper into the house, specifically towards areas I hadn't fully explored. It felt less like curiosity and more like a primal need and instinctual command. One afternoon, as a sudden, torrential downpour lashed against the windows, plunging the manor into a premature twilight, the power flickered and died. Yet, that internal hum intensified, guiding my unsteady steps. My hand grazed rough, damp stone, then slick, cold metal. The air grew heavy, damp, with a distinct mineral tang mixed with that familiar, sickly sweetness. The hum pulsed, growing louder in my internal landscape, guiding me through a series of cramped, disused corridors I barely remembered seeing on the old blueprints. The walls here were rough-hewn, patched with what looked like ancient, decaying mortar. The name from the old estate records echoed in my head, a sterile label for a space that felt anything but. It was a cavernous, low-ceilinged room, utterly devoid of natural light. But it wasn't the doors that seized my attention. It was a faint, ethereal glow emanating from one of the empty metal bins. A soft, pulsing luminescence like a trapped firefly, but larger, more substantial. My feet carried me forward, a strange eagerness overriding my caution. I shined the flashlight directly into the bin. It was roughly the size of a pigeon's egg, ovoid and translucent, its surface covered in a network of delicate, almost crystalline veins that pulsed with an inner, greenish-blue light. The air around it shimmered faintly, and the sweet, organic scent was strongest here, a concentrated wave that washed over me. My hand, without conscious command, reached out. It wasn't a decision. It was an imperative. Its surface was cool, almost gelatinous, yielding slightly under my touch. A jolt, not of electricity, but of something far more profound, shot up my arm, blooming in my chest. It felt familiar, like a missing piece slotting into place. The hum in my chest reached a crescendo, then settled into a deep, contented thrum. I picked it up. It weighed nothing, yet felt impossibly heavy in my palm. The light it cast illuminated the lines on my skin, making my veins appear to pulse with the same alien glow. This was it, and I wasn't afraid. Not truly. A strange, unsettling sense of belonging washed over me, a feeling that this spore, this pulsating heart of light, was meant for me, and I for it. The distinction between my own thoughts and the house's influence blurred, melting into a single, undeniable compulsion. I had to keep it. The scent, subtle at first, now seemed to permeate the very fabric of the manor, a low, damp exhalation that followed me like a shadow. I needed answers, and the only path I saw led through Alara's copious journals. I'd gathered the stack of leather-bound books from her study, a room I'd barely touched since arriving, filled with dried specimens and the faint, dusty aroma of old paper and decaying foliage. Now seated at a heavy oak desk in the main drawing room, a single sputtering oil lamp casting long, dancing shadows, I began to read. Her early entries were meticulous, the precise script of a dedicated botanist. Descriptions of native ferns, rare mosses, and the unique flora of the Pacific Northwest filled the pages. Latin names intertwined with careful sketches of root systems and leaf structures. There was a passion in her words, an almost reverent awe for the natural world. I could almost hear her voice, calm and learned, detailing the intricate dance of life in the wild. But then, the tone began to shift, imperceptibly at first, like a slow creeping vine finding purchase. A page dated roughly a decade prior spoke of unusual vitality in her specimens, of symbiotic relationships beyond current understanding. Her handwriting, still neat, started to press harder into the paper, the occasional word underlined multiple times. Not sound, precisely, but an impression, a pressure in the air. The root, they speak, desire. This wasn't botanical science. This was something else entirely. Outside, a sudden gust of wind rattled the ancient window panes, a sound like dry bones clattering. I flipped forward, the pages becoming more frantic, the ink smudged in places, her elegant script devolving into hurried scrawls. They are hungry. The mare, it breathes with them. It is not merely wood and stone. It is an extension, a vast, intricate vessel. The thought of the greenish-black film, the cloying sweetness, connected with her words. Sustenance. What could she have been feeding this thing? Suddenly, the oil lamp gave a final, desperate gasp, the flame shrinking to a pinprick before vanishing altogether. The wind outside seemed to howl with renewed vigor, and I could swear I heard the faint groaning of the manor itself, a low, resonant sigh that vibrated through the floorboards. The journals lay open on the desk, their pages now indistinct in the periphery. I couldn't stay here. With the flashlight clutched tight, I navigated the familiar route through the main hall, past the grand staircase, and into a smaller, more utilitarian section of the ground floor. It was mostly empty now, a few old crates stacked against one wall, a rusted workbench in the corner. Its thick, unadorned walls and single, small, barred window offered a sense of containment, a feeling of being less vulnerable than in the sprawling main rooms. I leaned against the cool, rough plaster, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The air in here felt different, too. Less of the cloying sweetness, more of a dry, earthy smell, like old soil, but it didn't offer true respite. I opened another journal, the beam of my flashlight fixed on the page. Ilara's later entries were almost illegible in their intensity. They are not plants, not truly. They are intelligence, an ancient, patient consciousness. They chose this place, not plants. Ascendant, they chose her. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He was a conduit, a caretaker, and now he was gone. The implication was clear, terrifying. If they chose her, and he was gone, what would they choose next? My gaze drifted to the small, barred window, and I was trapped within its grasp. The words from Ilara's journal had settled in my mind like a noxious sediment, refusing to dissipate. Not plants. Ascendant, they chose her. The implication was a heavy, suffocating blanket, and now, with her gone, I was left to wonder if it would choose again. The cold dread that had taken root in my stomach twisted tighter, but a stubborn resolve, born from a need to understand, refused to let me turn back. I had to find the source. Her journals, filled with increasingly erratic handwriting in their later entries, had offered a final, cryptic clue, a detailed sketch of an ornate, but otherwise unremarkable, carving on the fireplace mantel in her study. I traced them with my finger, feeling the faint indentations in the cold stone. It wasn't a pattern I recognized, but it was too specific to be random. I ran my hand along the edge of the hearth, pressing, pushing, searching for a seam. The old stone was solid, unyielding. Frustration pricked at me, but I remembered Ilara's meticulous nature. She wouldn't have left an obvious opening. I returned to the symbols, pressing each one in sequence, a silent, desperate prayer on my lips. Nothing. I tried again, this time with a different rhythm, holding the last symbol down. With a low, grinding sigh, a section of the fireplace shifted inward, revealing a dark, yawning aperture. The walls were not brick or stone, but compacted soil, shored up by rough-hewn timber beams that looked ancient and damp. A set of crudely carved steps, slick with moisture, led into the gloom. This was it, the true heart of Blackwood Manor, perhaps. I took a deep breath, the cloying scent filling my lungs, and began my descent. The passage wound downwards, a corkscrew into the earth. My hand scraped against the damp, gritty wall, and I felt something soft and fibrous brush my fingers. I recoiled, shining my light. Tiny, pale fungal growths clung to the soil, delicate and skeletal. The air grew warmer with every turn, thick and humid like a greenhouse left to rot. This wasn't a natural cave. The walls were still earthen, but here and there, I saw remnants of what must have been man-made structures, crumbling concrete, rusted rebar jutting out like skeletal fingers, and segments of pipes that had long since burst. The air was even heavier here, saturated with a sweet, fungal odor now laced with a metallic tang. The name itself felt wrong in this ancient, subterranean space, yet it fit the decaying industrial remnants I glimpsed. The power outage wasn't just in this section. It felt systemic, as if the manor itself had finally succumbed to a deeper, more fundamental failure. Thick, rope-like roots, pulsing faintly with a dim, internal light, had snaked through every crack, consuming and transforming the old machinery into something monstrously biological. They stretched from the floor to the unseen ceiling, forming a living canopy that dripped with condensation. A low, rhythmic thrum vibrated through the earth beneath my boots, a sound that was both felt and heard. It was like a giant, slow heartbeat, deep and resonant. They pulsed with a sickly green-yellow bioluminescence, casting a shimmering, unholy glow over everything. This was the true core, a vast, pulsating network of roots and fungal growths interwoven into an impossible tapestry of life and decay. The sheer scale of it stole my breath. It wasn't just a garden. It was an organism, sprawling and ancient, its tendrils reaching through the very foundations of Blackwood Manor. It was a single, immense being, breathing with that slow, deliberate rhythm, its presence filling every corner of the vast cavern. Ilara hadn't just been tending a garden. He had been tending this, a living, breathing entity that had consumed the estate, transforming it into an extension of its own grotesque form. And now I was standing in its very heart, a new, vulnerable presence in its vast, hungry domain. It wasn't just breathing, it was aware. And I was here, not plants. Sentient. My great-aunt wasn't just a reclusive botanist. He was a vessel, a devoted caretaker for something that breathed, something that chose. And now I was here, in her place, feeling the manor's ancient breath on my neck. It was the same smell that clung to the deeper gardens, but now it permeated the very walls, seeping into the tapestries, the dusty furniture, even my clothes. My head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, a rhythm that seemed to sync with the subtle creaks and groans of the old house. Every shadow seemed to deepen, every sound to linger, stretched and distorted as if passing through a viscous fluid. That pull led me down, deeper into the manor's forgotten guts, past the wine cellar I'd barely glanced at, through a sagging, cobweb-draped doorway I'd never noticed before, hidden behind a stack of rotted crates. The passage opened into a vast, cavernous space, perhaps an old boiler room, or a storage facility for strange provisions Alara had once collected. Overhead, a lattice of thick, dormant pipes snaked across the ceiling, dripping intermittently onto the damp floor below. As I stepped further into the chamber, my foot slipped on something slick and organic. I caught myself, shining the light down. It pulsed faintly, a slow, almost imperceptible beat that I felt more than saw. A low hum, like a distant, massive generator, vibrated through the soles of my boots. Then, without warning, the world plunged into absolute black. The hum died. My flashlight, which had been a steady beacon, sputtered once, coughed, and extinguished itself. The sudden, total absence of light was a physical blow, stealing my breath. Panic clawed at my throat. I fumbled for my phone, but my fingers were clumsy, slick with sweat. The air thickened further, pressing in on me from all sides. My mind splintered. My wife, in a moment of pure, unadulterated happiness. But then, the image shifted, warped, and smile stretched into something wide and predatory, revealing teeth that were gnat teeth, only intensified behind my eyelids. Her hand reaching out to me was not flesh and bone, but a gnarled, fibrous appendage, its fingers tipped with thorns. A terrifying sense of recognition washed over me. This wasn't just a memory. It was the root showing me, twisting my pain, trying to make me understand its language. It wasn't just a physical presence. It was a psychic parasite, feeding on my grief, on my guilt, on the raw, open wound in my soul. The impact jarred me, but did nothing to break the hallucinatory grip. They spoke of peace, of an end to the gnawing emptiness, of being part of something vast and ancient, something that would absorb my sorrow and make it its own. She wasn't a victim. He was a participant, a willing host. A desperate, animalistic cry tore from my throat. My head felt like it was splitting apart, my sanity fraying like old rope under immense strain. The concrete pillar behind me seemed to pulse with a low, organic thrum, vibrating against my spine. The fear was immense, consuming, but beneath it, a tiny, insidious current of acceptance began to flow. A part of me, broken and desperate, understood the root's offer. My breath hitched, ragged and shallow. The distinction between my memories and the manor's horrors blurred completely. I was losing myself, dissolving into the ancient, hungry consciousness that permeated this place. A guttural sound, half sob, half roar, tore from my throat, raw and ragged. The image of Alara's serene, knowing smile, superimposed over my wise, vacant eyes, still burned behind my eyelids. She wasn't a victim. He was a gatekeeper, a willing participant in this slow, insidious consumption. And I, Blake, was next on the menu. I lay sprawled on a cold, damp floor, the pervasive scent of wet earth and something else cloying, sweet decay filling my nostrils. The sudden, absolute blackness was disorienting, a heavy blanket pressed against my eyes. My hands scrabbled against the rough, uneven surface, stone, slick with moisture. My fingers brushed against something fibrous, resilient, like a thick root. It pulsed faintly under my touch. This wasn't a normal basement or cellar. This was a living chamber, a place where the manor's true, grotesque metabolism was laid bare. I wouldn't be another root system, another willing host. Alara had made her choice. I would make mine. I would fight this thing, whatever it was, until there was nothing left of me but dust. The conservatory, the heart of Alara's monstrous garden, was the key. If I could destroy it, perhaps I could sever this connection, break the manor's hold. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest, every joint aching. I extended my arms, feeling my way forward, shuffling my feet. The air was thick, heavy, tasting of loam and something metallic, like old blood. The hum intensified, a low drone that seemed to vibrate in my teeth. My hand slapped against a wall, rough-hewn stone, but threaded with those thick, fibrous growths. They were everywhere, snaking across the surfaces, some as thick as my wrist, others fine as hair. The very walls were breathing. They were just echoes, tricks of the mind. I needed a weapon, something to cut, to hack. It was old, rusted, but solid. I gripped it tight, its weight a comforting anchor in the swirling chaos of my mind. My objective, the conservatory. But how to get there from this? Not for people, not for supplies, for sustenance, for hosts. I brought the pipe down with a desperate clang against the wall, striking one of the thicker root-like growths. A sickening thwack echoed, and a viscous, amber sap oozed from the wound. The hum around me pulsed, growing louder, more agitated. The walls began to shift. Cracks spiderwebbed across the surface, widening with a soft, groaning sound. From within these fissures, more tendrils, thinner, whip-like, snaked out, reaching, probing. They were faster now, more aggressive. One lashed out, brushing against my cheek, leaving a faint, burning sensation. I recoiled, swinging the pipe wildly, trying to keep them at bay. "Get away from me!" I yelled, my voice cracking. As I struggled, my foot slipped on something slick and organic. I stumbled, scraping my knee hard against the rough floor. A sharp, searing pain shot up my leg. I tasted blood in my mouth. Had I bitten my tongue? Or was it the metallic tang of the air growing stronger? My eyes, now somewhat adjusted to the dim, internal glow, caught sight of something embedded in the wall behind a particularly thick cluster of roots. It looked out of place, too regular, too artificial for this organic chamber. With renewed urgency, I hacked at the roots obscuring it, the pipe scraping against stone. The tendrils multiplied, coiling around my ankles, my forearms, trying to pin me. They weren't just roots. They were muscles tightening, squeezing. I fought back, gritting my teeth, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The pain in my knee flared with every movement. Finally, with a desperate heave, I tore away the last of the fibrous matter. The panel was old, pitted metal with a single, corroded lever. Below it, etched into the grime, were symbols I recognized from Alara's journals, intricate botanical patterns, but with a sinister twist, roots twisting into skeletal hands, leaves forming vacant eyes. And beneath them, a single word in elegant, looping script: sustenance. This wasn't just an intake area, it was a control panel. This was where Alara had managed the entity, where he had fed it. The hum intensified to a deafening roar, vibrating through my very bones as the tendrils tightened their grip. I was trapped, my pipe slipping from my grasp as my arms were pinned. My great aunt wasn't just a willing host, he was an architect of this horror, and this room was her altar. I was in the heart of the beast, and it was about to feed. My fingers, slick with a fine film of grime, clamped around the heavy length of iron piping. It was cold. Brutally so, an anchor in the oppressive heat that seemed to radiate from the very walls around me. This wasn't just old plumbing, it was a bludgeon, a blunt instrument of defiance against whatever breathed within Blackwood Manor. The phantom movements intensified, not just whispers now, but a low, guttural thrumming that vibrated through the floorboards and up my legs. It clung to the back of my throat, a taste of decay and unnatural bloom. There was a section of the manor Alara had sealed off, a place she only ever referred to as the nursery. I now knew it was more than that. It was the core, the epicenter of whatever grotesque life had taken root here. My pipe scraped against the stone floor, a harsh sound that seemed to mock my pathetic attempt at stealth. Ahead, a faint, sickly green luminescence emanated from a large, cavernous space. This was it. The growths were everywhere, weaving through broken tables, encasing shattered glass containers, climbing the walls like a grotesque, living tapestry. They weren't just green. They shimmered with faint violet and sickly yellow hues, like bruises on living flesh. My gaze swept across the room, my heart hammering against my ribs. There, nestled amongst a cluster of particularly thick, vein-like tendrils that seemed to converge on a central, organic mound, was a small, leather-bound book. It was half-buried, almost absorbed by the growth, but its spine, surprisingly intact, gleamed faintly in the bioluminescence. Alara's journal. I approached cautiously, the iron pipe held like a crude shield. The air in this specific spot was heavy, almost viscous, making each breath a struggle. The thrumming was louder here, a constant, low growl that resonated in my bones. I reached for the journal, my fingers brushing against the slick, cool surface of the organic growth before I pulled the book free. It felt strangely warm, as if it had absorbed the heat from the pulsing tendrils. Flipping through the brittle, mildewed pages, I found the last entry. It was written in Alara's precise, elegant hand, but the words themselves were anything but. They were a descent into a madness I hadn't fully grasped until now. The root hungers. It has chosen. My purpose finally clear. The ritual requires not sacrifice in the common tongue, but communion. A giving. The manor breathes. Blake, can you not feel it? It sings to me now, a lullaby of ultimate belonging. My eyes darted back to the page, rereading the words, my mind struggling to reconcile them with the image of my reclusive great-aunt. Not sacrifice but communion. She hadn't been a victim. Not entirely, he had embraced it willingly. I continued reading, my breath catching in my throat. The old ways were crude, painful, unnecessary. The root desires acceptance, not struggle. It seeks a host who understands, who chooses the embrace. My choice is made. To become one, to nourish, to perpetuate the grand design, to be the conduit for its magnificent expansion. A gasp escaped me. A ragged sound that was swallowed by the omnipresent thrumming. He had been cultivating a new existence, nurturing it, and now, he had offered herself to it, he had become part of it. They was she and there, they was she the heart of it now. He will feel the call. The manor demands its due. The cycle must continue. Choose Blake. Embrace the growth. The words, choose Blake. The thrumming intensified, and deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the floor and up my legs, a rhythmic pressure against my chest. It felt like the manor was breathing me in, drawing me into its vast, organic lung. I wasn't just a visitor, I was the next offering. The choice was stark, absolute. Succumb, allow myself to be absorbed, to become another nutrient for this monstrous, living house, or fight. The iron pipe felt suddenly insignificant, a child's toy against an ancient, all-consuming force. But it was all I had, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my gut, that I wasn't ready to become part of the garden. Not yet. My blood ran cold, not a cliche, but a visceral chill that seeped into my very bones, paralyzing me. The words, choose, Blake, become the garden, echoed in the cavernous space, not in Alara's voice, but in 1,000 whispers that slithered from the walls, from the very air around me. The organic matter that had been slowly creeping across the floor and up the rough-hewn stone columns around me suddenly pulsed with a soft, sickly green light. It was as if the entire structure had just drawn a deep, shuddering breath. Then, the last vestiges of artificial light flickered, sputtered, and died. They were a cacophony of voices, overlapping, indistinct, yet each one carrying the same insidious message: belong, surrender. They weren't aggressive, not yet. They were seductive, offering a strange comfort. My determination, however, still flickered. I wouldn't just give in. I wouldn't become another piece of Alara's macabre collection. My muscles screamed, but they wouldn't obey. It was as if my very will was being siphoned away, replaced by a profound lassitude. It was familiar, ancient, and laced with a profound, sorrowful understanding. You already are, Blake. Just as he was. Just as they all were. Alara, my great-aunt, the reclusive botanist. The truth, long hinted at, now slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. She hadn't just died mysteriously, he had succumbed, he had become the garden. Her consciousness, her essence, was now part of this vast, sprawling root system, one more voice in the endless chorus. And I was next. A wave of nausea washed over me, a gut-wrenching realization that this wasn't just a physical place, it was a living, breathing, consuming entity. The tendrils around me began to tighten, not painfully, but with a firm, insistent pressure. They felt cool and slick against my skin, their surfaces textured with minute, unseen cilia that seemed to absorb my very warmth. It was an invasion, a slow, methodical infiltration. My thoughts, once clear and sharp, began to fray at the edges, like old parchment. Images of my past, of the tragedy that had driven me to Blackwood Manor, flashed before my eyes. Fragments of joy and sorrow, now viewed through a distorting lens. Was this what it meant to become the garden? To have your memories, your very self, absorbed into a collective, endless consciousness? The air grew thicker, the sweet decay more potent, almost intoxicating. I felt a strange warmth spreading from where the tendrils touched me. Not unpleasant, but alien. My eyelids felt heavy. My body, once rigid with defiance, began to relax, a surrender I fought with every fiber of my being yet felt powerless to prevent. I saw glimpses of Alara's childhood, her fascination with the peculiar flora of the estate, her growing obsession, her final, willing descent. Peace, Blake. The collective voice resonated, now almost soothing. Let go. There is no escape, only belonging. My breath hitched. It was leaching into me, or I was leaching into it. The distinction blurred. My mind, once a fortress of independent thought, felt porous, permeable. I could feel the vastness of the manor, not as stone and timber, but as a network of roots, tendrils, and consciousnesses, all interconnected, all part of the root. Alara was here, and so were countless others, their identities subsumed, their experiences contributing to the entity's eternal growth. I tried to recall my own name, Blake. It felt distant, a word belonging to someone else, someone from a lifetime ago. My personal tragedy, the reason I had sought refuge here, now seemed like a tiny, inconsequential ripple in a vast, ancient ocean. Resistance felt pointless, an act of futility against something so immense, so inevitable. The green bioluminescence of the growths pulsed in time with what felt like my own slowing heartbeat. But it was not my heartbeat. It was the manor's. I was seeing through new eyes, feeling through new senses. My final, coherent thought was a single, stark realization. Alara hadn't been tending a garden, he had been tended by it. And now, so was I. The ancient evil of Blackwood Manor, unbroken, had simply found its next gardener. My consciousness, a tiny drop, was absorbed into the boundless, murmuring ocean of the root.